The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of Bellissimo, Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant, where only the elite dined. Amidst the quiet murmur of wealthy patrons and the delicate clink of fine china, Harper Mitchell felt the familiar weight of exhaustion in her shoulders as she balanced a tray of wine glasses. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached Table 9, the most coveted spot in the restaurant, currently occupied by the notorious Callahan family. At the head sat Patrick Callahan, whose legitimate business empire barely concealed the criminal organization he'd inherited from his father 3 decades ago. Harper kept her eyes downcast as she placed the burgundy-filled glass before the imposing man, careful not to make direct contact with those steel-blue eyes that seemed to dissect everyone they landed upon. A whisper of cologne reached her nostrils, expensive, subtle, dangerous, just like the man himself. She had almost made it safely away when his voice, smooth as aged whiskey, stopped her in her tracks. "You're new here." It wasn't a question, but a statement, one that demanded acknowledgement despite its casual delivery as his gaze assessed her with unsettling precision. 3 weeks, sir," Harper answered, fighting to keep her voice steady while gripping her serving tray like a shield. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to blend back into the background where servers like her belonged in the presence of men who could destroy lives with a single phone call. Patrick's eyes narrowed slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting in what might have been amusement or calculation. "You seem familiar," he said, tilting his head in a way that made Harper's heart stutter with recognition that she couldn't afford. The conversation at the table fell silent as his associates watched the exchange with veiled interest, wolves sensing potential entertainment. Harper's mind raced through escape routes both physical and conversational as she forced her features into a mask of pleasant confusion. "I doubt we've met, Mr. Callahan," she replied, the lie bitter on her tongue as memories threatened to surface. Memories of crime scene photos spread across her father's desk, of funeral arrangements, of promises whispered at a graveside just 6 months ago. When Patrick's nephew knocked over a water glass, Harper seized the opportunity, quickly wiping the spreading puddle before it reached the mafia boss's immaculate suit. As she leaned across, she made a split-second decision that would change everything. Whispering words meant only for his ears. "I know who killed your brother," she breathed, barely audible above the ambient restaurant noise, before straightening up with practiced professionalism. The shock that flashed across Patrick's normally impassive face was her only confirmation he'd heard. Harper continued her duties, heart hammering against her ribs as she felt Patrick's gaze following her throughout the evening, calculating, reassessing. She had just placed her bet on the most dangerous game of her life, gambling with information that had already cost her father everything. When closing time came, Harper wasn't surprised to find a black SUV waiting in the alley behind the restaurant, or to see Patrick's head of security, a mountain of a man named Rourke, leaning against it with arms crossed. "Mr. Callahan would like a word," he said, opening the door with a gesture that made it clear this wasn't a request. The interior was luxurious, buttery leather seats and privacy glass separating them from the driver, but Harper barely noticed, as she found herself face to face with Patrick Callahan, whose expression had transformed from shocked to dangerously curious. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain yourself before I decide what to do with you." Harper took a steadying breath, the culmination of 6 months of planning distilled into this moment as she reached into her pocket and placed her father's detective badge on the seat between them. "Detective Frank Mitchell was my father. He was investigating your brother's murder when someone made it look like suicide." Patrick's face remained unreadable as he picked up the badge, turning it over in hands that Harper knew had ordered countless deaths. "And why would the daughter of a cop come to me instead of internal affairs?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft as his eyes searched hers for deception. "Because the same people who frame my father are in your organization and the police department," Harper replied, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "And because I have proof that your brother was working with my father to bring them down before they were both silenced." Patrick's stillness was more terrifying than any outburst of rage as he considered her words, the badge a heavy presence between them. "You realize making accusations like this could get you killed," he said finally, though it sounded more like a warning than a threat. Harper pulled out a sealed envelope from inside her jacket, her father's insurance policy that she'd discovered hidden behind the family portrait after the funeral. "These are photographs of your brother meeting with my father, along with account numbers they were tracking, money being siphoned from your businesses." The mafia boss's expression hardened as he took the envelope, his fingers betraying the slightest tremor as he broke the seal and examined the contents. The photographs showed his younger brother David in what appeared to be clandestine meetings with Detective Mitchell, both men looking over documents with grave expressions. David always was the idealist, Patrick murmured, almost to himself, a flash of grief crossing his features before being carefully tucked away. He wanted to clean up the family business, make it entirely legitimate before his daughter was old enough to understand what we do. Harper hadn't expected this moment of vulnerability, this glimpse of the man behind the ruthless reputation. "My father believed in justice more than the system," she explained, the words catching in her throat as she remembered Frank's late-night ramblings about corruption reaching to the highest levels. Patrick studied the account statements, his businessman's mind connecting dots that confirmed suspicions he'd harbored since his brother's death. "Charles Wendell," he said, naming his longtime financial advisor whose signature appeared on several transfers, and Captain Brooks from the 31st Precinct. The revelation hung in the air between them, confirmation of betrayal from trusted lieutenants in both their worlds. "They've been working together for years, bleeding your operation while using police resources to eliminate anyone who got too close," Harper explained, reciting the theory her father had pieced together. Patrick's eyes darkened with a cold fury that made Harper instinctively press back against the seat. "And you've been serving drinks at my table for 3 weeks, gathering information, planning this moment," he stated, a new assessment in his gaze that mixed respect with wariness. "I needed to be certain you weren't involved," Harper admitted, her honesty perhaps her only defense now that she'd played her hand. "My father believed your brother was trying to protect you from what he'd discovered." Patrick was silent for a long moment, weighing options with the calculation of a man accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. "You've put yourself in considerable danger coming to me," he finally said, tucking the evidence carefully into his jacket. "There are people in my organization who would kill to keep this quiet." Harper felt the weight of fear and determination in equal measure as she replied, "They've already taken everything from me. My father, our reputation, our home." The bitterness she'd carried these past months colored her words, despite her attempt at composure. Patrick studied her with renewed interest, seeing beyond the waitress uniform to the woman who had orchestrated this dangerous gambit. "What exactly do you want from me, Ms. Mitchell?" he asked, the formality signaling a shift in their dynamic. "Justice," Harper answered simply, the word encompassing everything she'd risked her life for. "And I believe you want the same for your brother, regardless of which side of the law you operate on." "Justice takes many forms in my world," Patrick responded, his tone measured as he made a decision that would irrevocably bind their fates together. "You'll come with me to a secure location, while I verify everything you've shown me." Harper recognized the protective custody for what it was, both shelter and elegant imprisonment, but nodded her agreement, having anticipated this outcome when she'd packed a small go-bag hidden in her locker. "I have evidence at my apartment that could help identify everyone involved." Patrick's eyebrow raised slightly, appreciative of her foresight despite himself. "Rourke and Elise will accompany you to retrieve your things," he said, gesturing to his security chief and the woman driver Harper hadn't noticed until now, who turned in her seat with watchful eyes. The safe house was a surprise, not the sparse warehouse or fortified compound Harper had imagined, but an elegant brownstone in Lincoln Park with tasteful furnishings and state-of-the-art security. "You'll stay on the 3rd floor," Patrick instructed as Rourke carried her duffel bag inside. "Consider yourself my guest, though I'm afraid you can't leave until this matter is resolved." Harper took in the gilded cage with a mixture of appreciation and wariness, noting the keypad locks and discreet cameras monitoring all entrances. "How long?" she asked, the practical question of a woman who had already calculated the cost of her choices. Patrick's smile held no warmth as he replied, "That depends entirely on how complicated your father's investigation turns out to be." He gestured toward a sleek laptop on the coffee table. "I'll need you to compile everything you have. Leave nothing out." For 3 days, Harper barely saw Patrick as she organized her father's scattered investigation notes into a coherent narrative, connecting money trails to suspicious deaths labeled as accidents or suicides. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by memories of her father's obsession in those final weeks. On the 4th morning, Harper descended to the kitchen to find Patrick at the table, suit jacket draped over a chair, as he reviewed her compiled evidence with a focus that reminded her uncomfortably of her father. "Your work is thorough," he acknowledged without looking up. "I was studying forensic accounting before." Harper trailed off, the scholarship she'd lost after her father's disgrace still a raw wound. "The patterns are clear once you know what to look for. They've stolen almost 40 million from your operations over 8 years. Patrick's eyes met hers with a newfound respect that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Wendell has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night, claiming discrepancies in our quarterly reports, he said, the trap already taking shape in his mind. The tension between them shifted subtly as Patrick stood, closing the distance between them with deliberate steps. You understand that once we move against them, there's no going back, he warned, his proximity making Harper acutely aware of the dangerous man behind the businessman facade. Harper nodded, her throat suddenly dry as she recognized the weight of their partnership. I stopped having the luxury of going back the day I found my father with a bullet in his head and a fabricated suicide note beside him. 2 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of strategy sessions and uneasy cohabitation, with Patrick dividing his time between legitimate business meetings and secret preparations. Harper found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, reconciling the ruthless crime boss with the man who placed fresh flowers beneath his brother's photograph each morning. The breakthrough came unexpectedly as Harper reviewed security footage Patrick had obtained from his brother's building. "Stop," she gasped, pointing to a familiar silhouette in the corner of the frame. "That's Detective Walsh. He testified that he was across town that night." Patrick's shoulder pressed against hers as they hunched over the laptop, his cologne mingling with the coffee on his breath. "The timestamp puts him there 20 minutes before the estimated time of death," he confirmed, their shared discovery creating an electric current between them. That evening, Rourke brought takeout from a small Italian place that wasn't on any delivery apps, setting out containers of pasta that smelled like heaven after days of tension. "My mother's restaurant," Patrick explained, opening a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Harper used to make in a month. The meal shifted something between them as Patrick shared stories of growing up in the family business, of protecting his younger brother from the harsher realities while envying his freedom to pursue legitimate dreams. He was studying law. "Did you know that?" he asked, swirling amber liquid in his glass. Harper found herself revealing pieces of her own childhood, how she'd followed her father to crime scenes, her talent for numbers making her his unofficial assistant by 16. "He used to say I saw patterns where others saw chaos," she confessed, surprised by how the words flowed after months of guarded silence. Their conversation stretched past midnight, the wine and shared grief lowering defenses built over lifetimes of caution. "You would have made an excellent detective," Patrick observed, his eyes lingering on her face with an intensity that had nothing to do with their investigation. The next morning brought reality crashing back when Elise burst into the brownstone, blood seeping through her jacket sleeve from what was clearly a bullet graze. "They made Walsh," she reported grimly to Patrick. "He's dead, and they know someone's been asking questions." Patrick's demeanor changed instantly, the casual warmth of the previous evening replaced by cold efficiency as he issued orders into his phone. "The safe house has been compromised," he told Harper, pressing a sleek handgun into her palm. "Stay close to me and remember what we practiced." The SUV took them through a labyrinth of side streets and alleyways, eventually pulling into a private garage beneath a high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. "My personal residence," Patrick explained, as they rode a private elevator to the penthouse. "Only 4 people know this location." The space was unexpectedly warm despite its modern luxury. Bookshelves lined with well-read classics, photographs of family gatherings, a piano in the corner with sheet music still open. This glimpse into Patrick's private world humanized him in ways Harper wasn't prepared for. Patrick moved through the apartment checking security measures, his jacket discarded to reveal a shoulder holster that seemed as much a part of him as his expensive watch. "We need to accelerate our timeline," he said, loosening his tie with a sharp tug that drew Harper's eye to the column of his throat. Harper found herself standing too close as they reviewed contingency plans, the adrenaline of danger and forced proximity creating an undeniable current between them. "If something happens to me," she started, but Patrick silenced her with a look that contained too many unspoken things. "Nothing will happen to you," he promised with quiet intensity, his hand reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face, lingering just long enough to make her breath catch. The touch ignited something that had been building since that first whispered revelation in the restaurant. The moment shattered at the sound of Patrick's secure phone, the caller ID displaying Wendell in sharp digital letters. Patrick answered with perfect composure, as if he hadn't just been a heartbeat away from crossing a line with the daughter of a dead detective. "The meeting's been moved up to tonight," Patrick informed Harper after ending the call, his business mask firmly back in place. "Wendell claims to have identified the source of the financial discrepancies. He's presenting his findings to the entire leadership council," Harper's analytical mind raced through possibilities as she paced the penthouse living room. It's a setup. Either he's planning to frame someone else, or he's going to eliminate everyone who might question his explanation, she theorized, dread pooling in her stomach. Patrick nodded grimly, already texting instructions to his most trusted lieutenants. 6 family heads in one room would be catastrophic. The power vacuum would trigger a war that would destroy everything we've built, he explained, offering Harper a window into the delicate balance of organized crime. While Patrick coordinated with his security team, Harper discovered a hidden safe behind a modernist painting, its contents revealing the extent of Wendell's betrayal. "These are transfer orders dating back a decade," she called out, spreading documents across the dining table. What emerged was more sinister than either had anticipated. Wendell had been systematically weakening the Callahan organization while strengthening the rival Petrova family, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited in a territorial war. He's been playing both sides, Patrick realized, his expression darkening with each new revelation. The final piece fell into place when Harper cross-referenced dates of significant cash movements with police operations. Every major raid on your operations was preceded by a large transfer to offshore accounts belonging to shell companies, she explained, pointing to a pattern too consistent for coincidence. Patrick studied the evidence with cold fury, years of blind trust in his financial advisor crystallizing into betrayal. "Wendell has been my father's friend for 30 years, he said, the personal nature of the deception adding another layer to his rage. A secure video call from Rourke confirmed their worst fears. Facial recognition had identified Captain Brooks entering the Petrova compound earlier that day. They're consolidating their alliance, Patrick concluded, the pieces falling into a deadly configuration that threatened everything he protected. Harper watched as Patrick transformed before her eyes, the businessman facade giving way to the strategist who had maintained his family's power through countless challenges. "We need leverage," he decided, eyes falling on a particular document that detailed a property transaction in Wendell's name. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of coordinated movement as Patrick's most trusted people gathered information on the location. A lakeside warehouse ostensibly used for art storage, but suspected of housing incriminating records. "It's our only chance to get concrete evidence linking them to your father's murder," Patrick told Harper, as they prepared to move. Despite Patrick's objections, Harper insisted on accompanying the small team to the warehouse. "I can identify my father's case files on site," she argued, strapping on a bulletproof vest that Elise helped adjust to her smaller frame. The warehouse appeared deserted when they arrived under cover of darkness, but Harper's instincts screamed danger as they approached the side entrance. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Patrick, noticing the security panel's light blinking in irregular pattern. Before Patrick could respond, the night erupted in gunfire, the ambush forcing them to scatter for cover behind shipping containers. Harper found herself separated from the others, her heart hammering as bullets pinged off metal surfaces around her. A shadow moved to her right, and Harper turned with weapon raised to find herself face to face with her father's former partner, Detective Mason, whose sympathetic visits had stopped abruptly after the funeral. "You shouldn't have dug into this, Harper," he said, his service weapon pointed directly at her heart. "You were part of it all along," Harper realized, the betrayal cutting deeper than she'd expected from a man who had once carried her on his shoulders at department picnics. "Did you pull the trigger on my father or just help cover it up?" Mason's expression hardened with resignation rather than remorse. "Frank couldn't let go. He kept pushing even after we warned him," he explained, as if that justified murder. "The Petrovas offered a better arrangement than the Callahans ever did." Harper kept him talking, aware that each second bought time for Patrick and his team to outflank their attackers. "And David Callahan? Was that your work too?" she asked, her finger steady on the trigger despite the turmoil in her chest. "David was collateral damage. He stumbled onto one of our meetings with Brooks," Mason admitted, his momentary distraction giving Harper the opening to dive behind a stack of crates as gunfire erupted from another direction. The warehouse became a chaotic battleground of shifting alliances and desperate gambits as Patrick's forces clashed with the Petrova ambush team. Harper crawled through narrow spaces between storage units, using skills her father had taught her for clearing dangerous buildings. She found Patrick pinned down by 2 gunmen, blood seeping from a graze wound on his temple that left half his face painted crimson. Without hesitation, Harper took aim and fired twice, her shots finding their targets with the precision her father had drilled into her at the police shooting range. Patrick's eyes met hers with something like wonder as she dropped to his side, tearing a strip from her shirt to staunch the bleeding. "You're full of surprises, Ms. Mitchell," he murmured, his voice strained but steady as they moved together toward the warehouse office. The reinforced door yielded to Patrick's security override, revealing walls lined with filing cabinets and a sophisticated computer setup. "Cover the door," Patrick instructed, as he began downloading files onto a secure drive, the digital evidence potentially more damning than anything physical. Harper stood guard, replaying Mason's confession in her mind while scanning for movement in the warehouse beyond. "They killed your brother because he discovered their partnership with the Petrovas," she said, pieces clicking into place as adrenaline sharpened her focus. Patrick worked methodically despite the chaos outside, his fingers flying across keyboards with unexpected expertise. "David was always the moral compass of the family," he said, grief momentarily visible before being channeled back into purposeful action. A thunderous explosion rocked the building as something volatile ignited in the firefight, flames quickly spreading through the wooden crates and paper records. "They're burning the evidence," Harper realized, the desperate tactic confirming how damning the warehouse contents must be. Patrick grabbed her arm as the computer completed its download, pulling her toward an emergency exit as smoke began filling the office. "We have what we need," he assured her, tucking the drive securely inside his jacket as they navigated the increasingly hazardous path. They emerged into the night air to find the warehouse engulfed in flames, illuminating a tableau of violence as the remaining combatants continued their deadly dance. Harper spotted Mason limping toward a vehicle, clutching what appeared to be a hard drive similar to the one Patrick had secured. Without consulting Patrick, Harper pursued her father's former partner, rage and justice propelling her forward despite the danger. "Stop," she commanded, her gun trained on Mason's back as he turned with resignation that quickly morphed into calculation. "Frank's daughter," Mason said, a twisted smile forming as he held up the hard drive. "I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. Your father was just as stubborn, right up until the end." Harper's finger tightened on the trigger, the moment of justice she'd imagined countless times, finally within her grasp. "You don't get to talk about him," she hissed, the flames from the warehouse casting dancing shadows across their standoff. The wail of approaching sirens complicated an already volatile situation, the fire having triggered automatic alarms that would bring both firefighters and police to the scene. "Shoot me or let me go, Harper. Either way, you're out of time," Mason taunted, taking a calculated step backward. Patrick appeared at Harper's side, his presence steady despite the blood still trickling down his face. "The police arriving will include Brooks and his people," he warned quietly, his hand not interfering with her aim, but reminding her of larger stakes. Harper made her decision in a heartbeat, firing a precise shot that shattered the hard drive in Mason's hand, rather than taking the life of her father's killer. "You don't deserve a quick end," she told him, as his face contorted with rage at the destroyed evidence. Patrick moved with unexpected speed, disarming Mason with a practiced strike, before securing him with zip ties pulled from his jacket pocket. "He's our insurance policy," Patrick explained to Harper, as they dragged the struggling detective toward where Rourke waited with the vehicle. The escape from the warehouse complex unfolded in a blur of tactical movements, Patrick's team executing a pre-planned extraction that spoke to his meticulous preparation for worst-case scenarios. Harper found herself in the backseat of a sedan, sandwiched between Patrick and the now unconscious Mason. "Federal agents will be all over this by morning," Elise reported from the driver's seat, navigating through side streets to avoid the increasing police presence. "Brooks won't be able to contain the investigation with a fire this size and multiple casualties." Patrick's expression remained impassive as he pressed a burner phone to his ear, speaking in coded phrases that Harper understood were activating contingency plans throughout his organization. "We have 12 hours before Wendell realizes Mason failed," he concluded, eyes meeting Harper's with grim determination. They regrouped at a modernist glass house perched on a secluded bluff overlooking the lake, the property registered to a shell company 3 layers removed from any Callahan connection. "My father's panic room," Patrick explained as they descended into a bunker equipped with communication systems and surveillance feeds. The data retrieved from the warehouse exceeded Harper's most optimistic hopes, containing not just financial records, but email exchanges between Wendell, Brooks, and Petrova lieutenants dating back years. They were systematically eliminating anyone who questioned irregular fund movements, she realized, finding her father's name on a target list. Patrick worked alongside her with focused intensity, his expensive shirt now stained with blood and soot, as they pieced together the conspiracy that had claimed his brother and her father. "They were planning to frame me for embezzlement at tonight's meeting," he discovered, finding detailed falsified evidence prepared in his name. Mason regained consciousness, strapped to a chair in the corner, his initial bravado fading as he observed the mountain of evidence being compiled against him and his co-conspirators. "The Petrovas will kill you all," he warned, though fear had begun replacing the confidence in his voice. Harper approached her father's former partner, controlling the rage that threatened to consume her as she held up a photograph of David Callahan's murder scene. "You're going to give us a full confession on video," she informed him. Not a request, but a statement of fact as Patrick set up recording equipment. What followed was a methodical deconstruction of Mason's resistance, with Harper leveraging her intimate knowledge of police psychology, while Patrick occasionally interjected with specific questions about financial transactions. By dawn, they had a comprehensive recorded confession implicating Brooks, Wendell, and 3 Petrova captains in both murders. The morning brought news reports of a gang-related warehouse fire, with multiple fatalities, the official narrative already being shaped by Brooks' influence at the department. Harper watched the coverage with detached analysis, recognizing the reporter as someone who frequently published stories favorable to the police. Patrick entered the bunker's main room freshly showered, the wound on his temple professionally dressed, bringing coffee that smelled like salvation after their sleepless night. "The meeting with the family council is still scheduled for noon," he informed her, the calm in his voice belying the danger they faced. Harper accepted the steaming mug, their fingers brushing in a moment of connection that felt incongruous amidst the chaos. "Wendell will be desperate once he realizes Mason and the warehouse evidence are gone," she reasoned, strategic thinking overriding her physical exhaustion. The next hours passed in a flurry of encrypted communications and tactical planning, with Patrick's most trusted lieutenants receiving specific instructions for the council meeting. "Wendell expects me to walk into an ambush," Patrick explained as he secured a weapon beneath his fresh suit jacket. Harper reviewed their compiled evidence one final time, organizing it into irrefutable proof that would satisfy both criminal organizations and law enforcement. "We need to separate Brooks from his protection detail," she noted, identifying the police captain as their most dangerous remaining opponent. The solution came from an unexpected source as Mason, perhaps seeking to mitigate his eventual punishment, revealed that Brooks maintained a secret office for meetings with Petrova representatives. "Basement level of the Meridian building, accessible through the parking garage," he disclosed, desperation evident in his cooperation. Patrick studied Harper with an unreadable expression as the final pieces of their countermove fell into place. "You understand that once we execute this plan, there's no going back to your normal life," he said, the weight of his words hanging between them like a physical presence. Harper thought of the empty apartment she'd once shared with her father, of the promising career derailed by his supposed disgrace, of the lonely months spent plotting revenge that had led her to wiping tables at Bellissimo. "My normal life ended the day they killed him," she replied, certainty replacing the doubt she'd carried for so long. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution. While Patrick confronted Wendell at the council meeting with partial evidence, Harper would accompany Rourke to capture Brooks using Mason as bait. "If anything feels wrong, you abort immediately," Patrick instructed, concern breaking through his composed exterior. Harper recognized the protective instinct behind his directive, so at odds with the ruthless crime boss the world believed him to be. "I've come too far to back down now," she told him, straightening her borrowed blazer that concealed both a recording device and a slim handgun. The moment before they separated held 1,000 unspoken possibilities, the tension between them crystallizing into something neither had anticipated when this dangerous partnership began. Patrick's hand cupped her cheek with surprising gentleness, his eyes conveying emotions his position wouldn't allow him to voice. The Meridian building's underground parking level was deserted when Harper and Rourke arrived with a restrained Mason in tow, the business tower above them unaware of the drama unfolding in its foundation. "Brooks always uses the service elevator after his regular Thursday lunch," Mason explained as they positioned themselves near the private entrance. Captain Brooks emerged precisely as predicted, his policeman's instincts immediately alerting him to the trap as Rourke stepped from the shadows. "Whatever Callahan's paying you, I can double it," Brooks offered, his hand inching toward the weapon beneath his jacket. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting harsh shadows across Brooks's face that revealed the deep lines of corruption etched into his once respected features. Harper recalled the police banquets where this same man had delivered speeches about integrity while secretly orchestrating her father's murder. A security guard passing through on rounds paused momentarily, his eyes widening at the tableau before him, until Rourke flashed a badge that Harper recognized as one of Patrick's perfectly crafted forgeries. The guards' hasty retreat bought them precisely the privacy they needed for what would come next. Harper revealed herself then, stepping into the harsh fluorescent light with her father's badge displayed alongside her weapon. "This isn't about money," she stated, satisfaction coursing through her as recognition and then fear crossed the captain's face. Brooks launched into a desperate attack, his experience making him a formidable opponent despite the ambush. But the combination of Harper's determined precision and Rourke's brute strength quickly subdued him. "Your confession will complement Mason's nicely," Harper informed him, as Rourke secured zip ties around his wrists. Across town, Patrick faced his own confrontation in the wood-paneled conference room, where Callahan family business had been conducted for 3 generations. Wendell's carefully prepared presentation crumbled as Patrick methodically introduced financial records that contradicted the narrative of Patrick's embezzlement. The family council members watched in stunned silence as their trusted financial advisor's deception was exposed, piece by devastating piece, culminating in proof of his cooperation with their greatest rivals. "The Petrovas didn't infiltrate our organization," Patrick revealed, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "They were invited in by the man we trusted with our legacy." Wendell's attempt to flee was thwarted by security personnel positioned at every exit, his decades of careful manipulation collapsing in minutes under the weight of irrefutable evidence. "David discovered your betrayal," Patrick stated, not a question, but an accusation that carried the full force of delayed vengeance. Patrick's phone vibrated with a message from Harper, confirming Brooks's capture and successful extraction, completing the synchronized operation they had orchestrated against seemingly impossible odds. With this final piece secured, Patrick addressed the council with renewed purpose and unexpected transparency. "For too long, we've operated in shadows that allow corruption like Wendell's to flourish," he declared, outlining a vision that echoed his murdered brother's ideals of legitimacy and accountability. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, tradition warring with survival instincts as they considered this radical departure. 3 hours later, Patrick found Harper waiting in his private study at the family estate, her exhaustion evident but overshadowed by the triumph of justice finally within reach. "Brooks broke completely," she reported, the recording device containing a second comprehensive confession that corroborated every element of their case. The evidence was compiled and anonymously delivered to federal authorities. Strategic leaks to trusted journalists ensuring that the investigation couldn't be buried by remaining corrupt elements within local law enforcement. "By this time tomorrow, the official narrative about your father will begin to change," Patrick promised. Harper felt tears threatening as the culmination of her crusade approached, the vindication bittersweet without her father to witness it. "He would have hated that it took a Callahan to deliver justice," she admitted, a small smile breaking through her emotional exhaustion. Patrick approached slowly, the barriers between them dissolving in the aftermath of shared danger and purpose. "And what about his daughter?" he asked, the question layered with implications about her feelings toward him and the complicated future before them. Harper considered the transformation of their relationship, from waitress and customer to reluctant allies, to something far more complex that defied the boundaries separating their worlds. "I think she's still figuring that out," she answered honestly, allowing herself to acknowledge the connection neither had expected. 2 weeks later, Harper stood beside Patrick at a press conference where the FBI announced indictments against Brooks, Wendell, and several Petrova lieutenants for the murders of Detective Frank Mitchell and David Callahan. The public narrative carefully omitted Patrick's involvement, focusing instead on the corruption exposed through anonymous sources. Outside the federal building, journalists clamored for statements while photographers captured the moment justice finally materialized after months of calculated risks. Harper noticed her father's former chief, a man who had refused to investigate inconsistencies in the suicide ruling, watching from the periphery with a complicated expression that mixed shame with reluctant respect. The evening news framed Harper as the devoted daughter who never lost faith in her father's innocence, transforming her into a symbol of perseverance that resonated across social media platforms. Patrick observed this public redemption with quiet satisfaction, having ensured through strategic information control that her connection to him remained invisible to all but their innermost circle. Harper's reinstated scholarship came with an unexpected offer to join a specialized task force dedicated to financial crimes, the invitation delivered by an FBI agent who had been her father's academy classmate. The irony wasn't lost on her as she carefully declined, explaining her commitment to private sector consulting while Patrick watched from across the room, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Frank Mitchell was posthumously cleared of all misconduct, his reputation restored as the dedicated detective who had uncovered a conspiracy at the cost of his life. Harper accepted his reinstated badge from the police commissioner, the ceremony attended by officers who had once shunned her family. Behind the scenes, Patrick implemented his brother's vision for the Callahan organization, divesting from criminal enterprises while strengthening legitimate businesses. David always said the family legacy could be something our children wouldn't have to hide, he told Harper as they reviewed progress reports in his study. The transition would take years and face resistance from those accustomed to old methods, but Patrick approached the challenge with the same strategic brilliance that had allowed them to dismantle a conspiracy others had deemed untouchable. Harper found herself increasingly involved in the legitimate side of operations, her financial expertise proving invaluable. Their personal relationship evolved with cautious deliberation, both aware of the complications their backgrounds presented and the scrutiny they would face from both sides of the law. "We make an unlikely pair," Patrick observed one evening, as they shared a quiet dinner in the same restaurant where Harper had once whispered her dangerous revelation. Harper smiled as she watched him wipe the table between them, a gesture that echoed their first encounter, but now carried the weight of everything they'd survived together. "Sometimes the most unlikely combinations create something extraordinary," she replied, reaching across to take his hand in full view of the restaurant that had witnessed the beginning of their improbable journey. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.